Good evening. My name is Cliff Schaffer. Tonight we will be discussing how to end the war on drugs, how we can find a better drug policy and move on towards drug policy reform. As you know, it is often quite difficult to convince people that we ought to have drug policy reform. There are many emotional barriers that have been built up. There have been many lies that have been told over the years. There are many prejudices which make it very difficult to really make an effective argument to many people. Tonight we will address some specific questions that will come up in the discussion of drug policy, and I will give you some answers which work for these. They work very well. In fact, they will just end the argument right there. Next, we will discuss showstopper questions for your opponents. These are questions that anybody who supports the current policy simply cannot answer in any reasonable manner. You can knock them out of the debate right there with very simple questions. The third thing we will discuss is strategies to win, and that is what you can do as an individual to help further the cause of drug policy reform and to get some new drug laws in these United States. First, we will go with answers to specific questions. One of the things that you will get many times if you attempt to argue for drug policy reform is people will ask you, are you a drug user? Well, we have to recognize this for what it is. It is an attempt to turn a debate into a personal attack. By trying to allege that you are a drug user, these people are trying to destroy your credibility by attacking you rather than addressing the issues. If you are confronted by this, tell them, deal with the issues. Don't make this into a personal attack. Whether I am a drug user or whether anyone is a drug user or not is entirely irrelevant to the evidence. Let's look at the evidence. If they persist in trying to say, well, that must mean you are a drug user, then remind them that if they say that without proof, they are accusing you of an illegal act, which is an actionable offense under the law. In other words, you could sue them for slander. And that's quite well established in the law. Usually, they will back off of whatever they said at that point. They don't want to get sued, and at that point, you're making them realize how low this kind of attack is. This really isn't an intellectual argument, it is just a personal attack. The second argument that comes up quite frequently is, if we legalize drugs, then everyone will become drug addicts. Every major study of drug policy agreed that there is no evidence to support this belief. And even if drug use did increase, decriminalization would still be a better approach. In Europe, several countries have decriminalized drugs and actually seen a significant drop in drug abuse. The basic strategy here is simply to challenge the fact that they don't have any way at all to back up that claim. It is purely supposition, there is no evidence for it, and every major study agreed that even if it did occur, decriminalization would still be a better approach because the current policy is so bad. The next argument you will get is, we need a combined approach of education, treatment, prevention, and stiff law enforcement. Well, what they are attempting to do is they are attempting to smokescreen the issue. They are attempting to hide prisons behind this wall of a total policy, this cloud, this mist. My answer to that is this. We agree 100% on education, treatment, and prevention. The only place where we part company is on the issue of prisons. How many millions of people will have to go to prison in order to solve the problem this way? Bring it back to the central issue when you debate this point. bring it back to the issue of prisons. The issue is not legalization. The issue is not decriminalization. The issue is how many millions of people are we going to put in prison for a policy that we know cannot work. Bring it back to that issue and you will win every time. They will begin to back off of their love of prisons real quick. The next argument you get is a very emotional one. My son or daughter was turned into a psycho by drugs, so we have to stamp out this evil menace. Now keep in mind that anyone who says this kind of thing is probably under tremendous emotional stress, so it would not be polite or productive to suggest that their kid was probably a psycho all along and that drugs were just a symptom, not the problem. Keep a gentle, sympathetic demeanor. It doesn't do you any good to run down their kid or to criticize their kid. The answer is, we have made these drugs as illegal as they can be, and these kinds of tragedies still happen. The fact that your son or daughter became a victim of these drugs shows in itself that the current policy did not work for you and your family. I believe there may be a better way to handle the problem that just might have saved your son or daughter. Don't you think we should at least explore the possibility of a better way to handle the problem? Now that will generally diffuse most of the emotion. It will allow them to agree to something that's very reasonable. We want to find a better way to save these kids, including their daughter. The only way we're going to do that is to have a public hearing on it where all of the evidence can be seen by everybody. There's a similar argument you get from individuals who have been drug addicts, and that is, I used to be a junkie until I was saved from the life of evil, and I know that drugs should not be legalized. They seem to have credibility with a lot of audiences because they were junkies and then they know more than the person in the audience. But there's a couple of real good answers to this. The first is simple. It's illegal now and it didn't stop you. All it really does is keep most people from getting help sooner because we are spending all of our money on prisons and we cannot provide adequate treatment. So the policy really doesn't help you. The second answer is this, it's a very simple one. Would you be better off if you had spent 20 years in prison? If we really did it the way you are suggesting, you would still be in prison and not here to talk to me. Do you think that's the right thing to do? And always follow it up with something like, do you think that's the right thing to do? Because you will force them to make a mental decision, even if they don't answer you. Many of them won't answer you if you ask that. The next answer you get is, you just want to legalize it, you commie scum. Well, again, this is an emotional argument. They're simply attacking you, trying to reduce your arguments to a simple one-word response, legalization. And the answer to that is to not respond to their personal attacks on you. Sidestep the issue. For instance, say, of course I have my own ideas about what might be a good solution to the problem, but that is not the point. The point is that we need to bring all of our best minds together to review all of the evidence in public and come to a conclusion together. That is what we need to do, because I admit I probably don't have all of the right answers, but I am willing to support the commission that will find them. Get them to support just the commission, just the open and honest investigation. If you do that, you'll win eventually. Another point that they make is they will often distort the information and the policies coming out of Europe. For example, they'll say, they tried this in Europe with Needle Park and it didn't work, so they're going back to throwing people in prison. Well, this is absolutely not true. In the first place, as signers of the resolution for a federal commission on drug policy, we now have the chief of police of Rotterdam, the Netherlands, as a supporter, and every prosecutor in the district attorney's office in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. All of the law enforcement officials in the Netherlands believe that decriminalization is a significantly better approach than what the Americans are doing. So it's just not true. We will be publishing more information on this later so that you can know exactly what the facts are and rebut this argument whenever it comes up. It's a flat-out lie. Another thing you will run up against is they will ask you, what do you think we should do about drugs? Well, don't fall into the trap of telling somebody that, gee, you think drugs ought to be sold for $2.50 a hit in a drugstore or in liquor stores or whatever. What it will do is it will open you to attack. You don't have the right answer anyway, I can bet that. So anything you say in response to that, as far as your own ideas, will not do you any good. It will just make you weaker in the debate. If you encounter this, then go back to the strategy I mentioned before. I have my own ideas about what might be a good solution to the problem, but that is not the point. The point is that we need to bring all of our best minds together to consider all of the ideas for a better solution and pick the one that is best. My ideas will not be it, your ideas will probably not be it, but we need to get together, read the evidence, and find out together what is a better approach. Another argument that you often get is, well, why don't we just legalize murder, robbery, and burglary and all the other crimes, and then we won't have a crime problem? Well, in the first place, this is comparing apples and oranges. There's a big difference between smoking pot and murdering or robbing somebody, and for that reason alone, we should have different approaches to the problems. Secondly, there are about 25,000 homicides in the United States each year, and there are about 30 million people who use illegal drugs. If we had 30 million murderers or robbers, we would have to find another way to deal with the problem simply because the criminal justice system can't handle it. There is no way that we can arrest that many of anybody and process them through the criminal justice system by any stretch of the imagination. It is a flat impossibility. Why should we even try? We have to look for a better approach for that reason alone. But even that avoids the real issue. The real issue is what is the most effective way to deal with the problem. There is nothing cast in stone that says that prison is the only way to deal with drugs. There are other ways to deal with different social problems, and we should look for the best approach here that most reduces the harm done by drug abuse. Next, here are some showstopper questions for your opponents. Now, I have used these questions many times against everybody from low police officials, police officers on the beat, up through some of our highest federal government officials. Nobody has ever given me an answer to any of these questions which did anything but make them look stupid. And they are very simple questions. Now, when I go through these questions, I will list the possible answers that they give, and I will tell you the strategies that they will try to use to get out of answering these questions. I will also tell you what strategies to use when they give you this kind of smokescreen approach. The first question is this: how many millions of people will have to go to prison in order to solve the drug problem this way? Now, any answer that they give to this question is absolutely bound to be wrong. If they mention a low number, point out that we already have hundreds of thousands of people in prison for illegal drugs, and millions have been arrested and prosecuted. That obviously did not stamp out drugs, so a small increase in the number of prisoners is not likely to have any good effect. If they mention 5, 10, or 20 million, multiply the number they mention by $500,000 each and tell them the cost of that approach. For example, the cost to incarcerate 1 million people is $500 billion. That's billion with a B, $500 billion. To incarcerate 2 million, the total cost is about $1 trillion. And to incarcerate 10 million, that is 1/3 of all of the illegal drug users in the United States, would cost $5 trillion. not counting the losses to the economy because you will have put a lot of productive, working, tax-paying citizens in jail. Any reasonable approach to this problem by throwing people in jail, if you were going to stamp it out, would require putting more people in prison than all of the people in the Nazi concentration camps during World War II. Now, they may also say that this assumes that all drug users will have to go to prison, so it is not a valid question. They try to get out of answering it. You say, no, it just assumes that some percentage of them will have to go to prison. I want to know that percentage so that we can go make plans to build that number of jails. So I, as a taxpayer, can know how many tax dollars I am going to have to spend on putting illegal drug users in prison. I want to know that. I want to know what the actual cost is. Tell me the number that will have to go to prison. Ultimately, you will probably get them down to the point where they say, well, I don't know. Who can know that? I just don't know. Then you say, that is precisely the problem. No one, including you, has ever sat down to figure it out. If you did, you would find out soon enough that it is just plain impossible to solve the problem this way. Now, occasionally, you also try to go on with some long-winded explanation. Well, if they do that, do this. Excuse me for interrupting, but that was not an essay question. The question can be answered with just a simple number. What will it take? 5 million, 10 million, 20 million? How many millions of people will have to go to prison in order to solve the problem this way? What usually happens after you take them through this is they immediately start to say, well, I'm not so in love with prisons. Well, if you recognize that prisons is a bad approach, then we agree. The next showstopper question is a simple one. I have here a list of every major study of drug policy in the last 50 years. Every one of them recommended decriminalization. Do you agree that the overwhelming weight of the scholarly evidence on drug policy supports decriminalization? And before you answer, let me remind you that there are only 3 possible answers to this question. The first possible answer is yes, you agree that the overwhelming weight of the scholarly evidence on drug policy supports decriminalization. The second possible answer is no, you do not agree, in which case you should be able to provide a list of studies of drug policy comparable in quality and quantity to the list I have provided. And the third possible answer is that you don't have a clue what the scholarly evidence says because you have never read the most basic research on the subject. Now, if anybody wants a list of these drug studies that I have mentioned here, they can call the number that will be shown at the end of this tape, and for a stamped self-addressed envelope, I will be happy to provide them with it. Now, the answers that I get in response to this, and I have asked this of everyone from police officers on the beat up through our drug czars, including Bob Martinez and William Bennett, and the answers I've gotten are this. A lot of people will sit there and actually pick up your own wording and say, I don't have a clue. That's the most common answer. Usually they sit there with a stunned expression on their face and don't know what to say. If they say they don't know or don't have a clue, then you say that is precisely the problem. How can you talk about drug policy if you have never read the most basic research on the subject? Now, at times also, they will try to smokescreen you. They will try to go off into some long-winded discussion which avoids the issue. If they try that, then use the old excuse me for interrupting. And that is, excuse me for interrupting, but that was not an essay question. That was multiple choice. What is your answer? Yes, no, or don't have a clue. Now, some of the answers I have gotten from the drug czars are this. Bob Martinez, the former drug czar, said the scholarly evidence is not important. Well, that tells you an awful lot about our current drug policy. But my question for that is the scholarly evidence not important in science, medicine, and every other field of law or study? Or is it not important when it only comes to drug policy? The next answer they will give you is, I don't think anyone really knows the answer to that question. Well, that's a load of BS, and you know it because you can go down to the library and read these things. You can go down and do all the research you need to determine what the weight of the evidence supports. And in that case, I say, can you name any major study of drug policy which supported what we are currently doing? I've never had anybody come back and name one. As far as I know, there aren't any. So we have 10 major studies, including the largest studies ever conducted by the governments of the United States, Britain, and Canada, which supported decriminalization, and none that supported the current policy. Wouldn't you say that that is the overwhelming weight of the evidence? Most of them don't get up after they do that. The next one is a simple comparison between $2 figures. It costs about $500,000 to put a single drug user in prison, which includes $150,000 for arrest and prosecution, about $150,000 for a new prison cell, and about $30,000 per year for at least 5 years. For the same cost, we can provide education or treatment for more than 100 people. Which do you think is the better deal? Well, this kind of forces your opponent into a corner. Almost no one will attempt to argue that prison for one person is better than education or treatment for several hundred. Most often they will say, it's not that simple. You just can't say that because you are not going to put one person in prison, then you automatically have the money for treatment or education. What you can answer is this. It is that simple. Right now, California and several other states are closing schools, libraries, and medical facilities in order to build more prisons. The money is being taken directly from education and treatment in order to fund more prisons. In addition, there is a great deal of evidence to show that if you put people in prison, it only drives people away from treatment and education and creates an alienation between them and the police. And of course, we've seen this happen. Now, you will not get answers to these questions. What they will do is they will simply collapse after a few minutes. They can't answer them. I've never had anybody answer them within the last 5 years, and I've posted them everywhere. It is my belief that if we are going to win the drug war, if we are going to end the drug war, then we must pick issues where we can win by knockout. The odds are so stacked against us that unless we win by knockout, we will not win at all. While I agree that there are many arguments that are good arguments for decriminalization or legalization, I do not favor many of these issues as the primary focus. The primary reason that I do not like a lot of these arguments is because they are complicated, they are hard to explain. There are two primary issues where I believe we can win by knockout right now. Number one is the treatment of medical patients. These medicines, and call them medicines, should be made available for people who are desperately ill. There is no moral or humane reason to deny the people simple, cheap relief from ordinary medicines. The second is the incarceration of African American men. At this point, 2/3 of all of today's black male teenagers will be dead, disabled, or in prison before their 30th birthday. This is a national disaster, and we have to do something about it now. We also need the black community to recognize what is going on and to join us as allies. We must build a coalition of constituencies. We must bring people of different persuasions together to support our cause. We must explain this in terms that are relevant to them. This includes the medical community, medical patient groups, African American men, and most importantly, religious leaders, church leaders. There is a reason, a moral reason, for religious leaders, church leaders, to support a reformed drug policy. What we are doing now, in simple terms, is a sin. We should not be doing it anymore. And we must seek action. Now is the time to put the pressure on. The drug war is weak. We are on a roll. These people are getting scared, and they are beginning to fall out. Every time we go to fight them, they cower and run. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that this has helped you, and I hope that this will help you more effectively, to be more effective in arguing for drug policy reform. Thank you.